I want you to forget headlines for a second, forget politics, forget narratives, and focus on just one number, not casualties, not missiles, not airstrikes. A weight, 50,000 tons. Because if a military force loses that much ammunition, it doesn't just lose firepower, it loses time, it loses options, and in some cases, it loses the ability to fight at all. Now imagine this: 15 ammunition depots, hit within 48 hours, across one of the most sensitive military fronts in the world. If something like that actually happened, this wouldn't just be a strike, it would be a system collapse. And today, we're not just asking what happened, we're asking something much deeper. What would it actually mean if it did? This isn't about explosions. Most people think war is about destruction. Big explosions, airstrikes, front lines moving. But professionals don't look at war that way. They look at logistics. Because here's the truth: an army doesn't run on courage. It runs on supply. Every artillery shell, every tank round, every precision strike, all of it comes from somewhere, stored, moved, distributed. So when people hear depots destroyed, it sounds dramatic, but what it actually means is far more serious. The system behind the army has been hit, not the soldiers, not the tanks, the ability to keep using them. Why ammunition is everything. Let's slow this down and really understand what's happening here, because this is the part most people underestimate. When people think about military power, they picture advanced jets, heavy tanks, missile systems, all the visible hardware. But none of that actually matters without one thing: ammunition. Because ammunition is what turns equipment into capability. Take artillery as the clearest example. In movies, artillery fires in dramatic moments. One strike here, one strike there. In reality, it's the exact opposite. In an active conflict, artillery doesn't fire occasionally. It fires continuously, hour after hour, day after day. A single artillery unit can fire hundreds of rounds in just one day under sustained operations. Now, zoom out. That's one unit. Modern military fronts don't operate with one unit. They operate with multiple battalions, spread across different sectors, all requiring constant fire support. So when you multiply that across an entire front, you're no longer dealing with small numbers. You're dealing with tens of thousands of rounds being consumed every single day. And that word matters: consumed. Because this isn't about what you have stored, it's about what you are burning through, continuously. Ammunition is not a static resource. It's a flowing system, stored in depots, moved through logistics networks, delivered to units, and used at a pace that never really stops. Which means the moment that flow is interrupted, everything changes, and it doesn't change slowly. It hits immediately. Day one, commanders start noticing pressure. Fire missions get reduced, targets get prioritized, some requests are denied. Day two, it becomes serious. Rationing begins. Units that were firing freely are suddenly restricted. Instead of hundreds of rounds, they're told to fire only when absolutely necessary. Every shot starts to matter. Every decision becomes heavier. Then comes day three, and this is where the real shift happens. Silence. Not because the conflict has ended, not because the threat is gone, but because the supply is no longer there to sustain the fight. And once artillery goes quiet, the entire battlefield dynamic shifts. Infantry units lose their protective fire cover. Armored units become more exposed to threats. Defensive lines become weaker. And offensive operations, if they were planned, slow down or stop completely. Because artillery isn't just a weapon, it's a force multiplier. It shapes the battlefield. It suppresses enemy movement. It creates space for maneuver. Remove it, and everything else has to operate under far greater risk. That's why ammunition isn't just important. It's foundational. It's the difference between a force that can act and a force that can only react. And once that shift happens, reversing it is not quick, and it's definitely not easy. What makes depots hard to hit now? Here's where things get really interesting, because this is the part that separates surface-level understanding from how military planners actually think. Ammunition depots are not easy targets. They're not just warehouses sitting out in the open, waiting to be hit. In fact, they are some of the most protected and carefully designed facilities in any military system. Why? Because everything depends on them. So militaries invest heavily in making sure these locations are hidden, hardened, and extremely difficult to identify, let alone destroy. Many of these depots are built underground, sometimes deep enough to withstand direct impacts. From the outside, they're designed to look like ordinary terrain. No obvious structures, no clear signatures, nothing that immediately stands out in satellite imagery. Even the construction process is often planned in a way that avoids drawing attention, spread out over time, disguised within civilian or natural patterns. And then there's protection. These sites are not left exposed. They're surrounded by layered defenses, air defense systems, camouflage techniques, physical barriers, and strategic placement away from predictable target zones. Some are specifically engineered to survive airstrikes. That means reinforced concrete, blast-resistant doors, shock-absorbing internal layouts, everything designed with one goal: survive the first hit and keep functioning. So when you think about what it takes to hit one of these successfully, it's not simple, it's not even just difficult, it's highly complex, because hitting a depot isn't about landing a missile somewhere nearby. That doesn't achieve much. To actually disable it, you need precision. And precision comes from one thing: intelligence. Because knowing where something is only the beginning. To destroy a depot effectively, you need to understand it in detail. You need the structural layout, how the facility is built from the inside, the entry and exit points, where materials move in and out, the weak spots, areas that are more vulnerable than others, the depth of storage, how far underground the critical inventory is located, and most importantly, real-time updates, because these facilities aren't static. They evolve, they get upgraded, reinforced, modified. Old information becomes outdated quickly, and outdated intelligence leads to missed targets. That's why even the most advanced weapons in the world are not enough on their own. Without accurate, up-to-date targeting data, they can hit the area, but miss the objective. And that's a critical difference, because damaging a depot is not the goal. Disabling it is. With poor intelligence, you might cause surface damage, maybe even temporary disruption. But with precise intelligence, you don't just damage the facility, you hit it where it matters most. You target the points that make it functional, and when those points are taken out, the entire system shuts down. That's the real distinction here. This isn't about explosions. It's about understanding the system well enough to break it completely, and that level of understanding is far more powerful than the weapons themselves. The 48-hour factor. Now let's slow this down and focus on something that doesn't sound dramatic at first: timing. Because in military operations, timing is not just a detail, it's everything. And 48 hours is not a random number. It's a window, a very specific window. Because if supply disruption happens slowly, armies adapt. That's what they're trained to do. If one route is cut off, they reroute. If one depot is lost, they pull from another. If supplies drop, they adjust usage and buy time. There are contingency plans for almost everything: fallback positions, reserve stockpiles, emergency logistics pathways. So when disruption is gradual, it becomes a problem, but not a collapse. There's time to think, time to respond, time to stabilize the situation. But now imagine a completely different scenario. Not one disruption, not two, but multiple critical points being hit at the same time. Suddenly, all those contingency plans start to break down because they depend on something very simple: time. Time to assess, time to communicate, time to move resources. And if everything happens within a tight window, that time disappears. There's no breathing space, no adjustment period, no opportunity to shift from Plan A to Plan B. Instead, everything starts failing together. Supply lines stop, distribution networks break, command decisions become reactive instead of strategic. And this is what military planners fear more than almost anything else: simultaneous system failure. Because it's not just one problem, it's multiple problems, stacked on top of each other, all happening faster than they can be solved. And here's where the difference becomes critical. Damage is something an army can recover from. A damaged system still functions, just at a reduced level. But collapse? Collapse is different. Collapse means the system stops working altogether. And once that line is crossed, recovery is no longer immediate. It becomes slow, complex, and uncertain. Because you're no longer fixing one issue. You're rebuilding an entire network. That's why 48 hours matters so much. It's short enough to overwhelm response systems, but long enough to execute a complete sequence. It creates a situation where, by the time the first impact is fully understood, the second and third have already happened. And by the time decisions are made, the system they depend on is already gone. That's not just pressure, that's overload. And in that kind of environment, even well-trained, well-equipped forces can struggle, not because they lack capability, but because the structure supporting that capability has been disrupted too quickly. So when we talk about 48 hours, we're not just talking about speed, we're talking about design. A time frame that turns disruption into something much more serious. The difference between a system that bends and a system that breaks. Simultaneous system failure. And that's the difference between damage and collapse. The chain reaction. Let's follow the consequences. If major ammunition depots are lost, first, artillery slows. Then armored units face limits. Tanks aren't just machines. They are consumers of ammunition. Without resupply, they become static. Then comes air power. Precision strikes rely on specific munitions, not interchangeable, not easily replaced. If those are gone, planned operations don't get delayed, they get canceled. And suddenly, an army that looks powerful on paper becomes restricted in reality. The real strategy. Here's where most people misunderstand modern warfare. Winning isn't always about defeating the enemy directly. Sometimes, it's about removing their ability to function. Think of it like this. Instead of attacking the fighter, you remove the oxygen, no fight. That's what supply interdiction does. And if executed correctly, it doesn't matter how advanced the army is. Without logistics, capability disappears. Why resupply is not simple. A common assumption is, if supplies are destroyed, just send more. Sounds simple, but it's not. Because resupply depends on infrastructure, airfields, ports, transport routes, and if those are damaged or under threat, even the strongest ally cannot respond quickly enough. This creates a dangerous gap, the time between loss and replacement. And in modern conflict, that gap can decide everything. The bigger question. So now we come to the real question, not just, did this happen? But what does it reveal if it could happen? Because if a military system, no matter how advanced, can be disrupted this quickly, then the issue isn't just tactical, it's structural. It raises questions about dependency on supply chains, speed of response, resilience under pressure, and most importantly, how modern wars are actually fought. So when you hear numbers like 15 depots, 48 hours, 50,000 tons, don't just think about destruction. Think about capability. Think about sustainability. Think about how quickly things can change when the foundation disappears. Because in modern conflict, the side that controls supply doesn't just gain an advantage, it controls the outcome. If you want deeper breakdowns like this, where we go beyond headlines and into what actually shapes outcomes, subscribe, like the video, and share your thoughts below. Because the real story is never just what happens, it's what it means.